Hello, good evening from central London. So I'm always excited to jump on here and to bring you some of the biggest news that's affecting and impacting the property industry, specifically as we look at the general property market, but we do look at what's impacting landlords today. And some of the biggest news, of course, that we do know is impacts when it comes to taxes, but specifically why landlords are exiting the market. So there's no surprise as to landlords exiting the market. We've been seeing this since I think right back to 2016. But the thing is that it continues in 2024 when we look at the numbers comparison to 2022 and 2023. So today, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to be diving into the numbers of landlords exiting the market. And before we do, I always like to check a little bit in terms of audio and video. Make sure that everyone can see me, but most importantly, hear me, and we can bring the most important discussions to the table. So, hi Andrew, really good to see you. Have you online and connect as always. Wise process. Thank you so much. We definitely have some loyal listeners here. So listen, last week we had, if I'm not mistaken, one of our videos that was proved to be very popular, and that video, of course, was the 5 new policies for landlords. So anyone who hasn't seen that, again, is proved to be hugely popular, with a lot of people commenting with regards to these 5 new policies from Labour, which is not obviously not making a lot of landlords happy at the moment. But today I want to bring you something that I'm not going to be bashing away at Labour, for those who are Labour supporters, if any, on this channel. But it is going to be about also reviewing just general policies that have been driving landlords out of the buy-to-let market. And I just want to dive straight into it, if I may. So, first thing is that Property Mark. If you're not familiar with Property Mark, they are part of ALA, which is the Association of Residential Letting Agents. They publish some great articles, and one of the latest articles that they've published is the impact of Section 24 on a buy-to-let landlords. Now, this connects nicely with the topic that we're talking today, which is about landlords selling up and how we're seeing more of those landlords selling up. And those numbers don't lie when we look at them in comparison to 2015 and 2014. I mean, I'm going to share with you an article, and this article is by Landlord Today, and the article reads, "Where off? Landlords exodus continues as even more sell up." And this is without even some of the biggest news that I think is going to come in October. And for some of you landlords out there that's been following the news with regards to property tax, I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about. But for those who don't, keep online, and I'm going to be sharing something with you that, if you've been thinking about selling, may just be the push or the final push that you may have needed to actually get your property sold. And listen, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news and say, hey, buy to let is no good and it's dead and, everyone should sell up. Not really. On the contrary, I think buy to let continues to be a viable business. But there is a key word there. I am saying business. It needs to be treated like a business. Gone are the days where you can just be a landlord and have a couple of properties and treat it casually. No, it has to be a business. And like any other business, it has its ups and its downs. It has its profitable years, and it has those years that perhaps you break even, and dare I say it, even make a loss. And by the more efficiently that you run that business, the more profit it's going to allow you to have. It's weird as I say this. Actually, it's bizarre because it's the government, not only Labour. Labour's just come in after several years of not being in government. But it is bizarre that the government has pushed this buy-to-let industry to a corner whereby they've had to now, savvy landlords have had to now treat it like a business, as opposed to, being able to just have it casually, have their tenants, and not really look at the bottom line as much as you have to do now, because margins are tight. And when margins are tight, of course, you need to look at your numbers. So again, it's bizarre that it's the government who has pushed this industry into this corner. So listen, I wanted to share with you this article with where the title reads, "We're off, landlord continues, exodus continues as even more sell up." So there's been a substantial rise in landlords exiting the market or downsizing their portfolio, analysis by 20 EA has found. I'll add one more there, or not even entering the market at all. And there are things that have been discouraging landlords, either upsizing their portfolio or even enter into the market, which we'll talk about a little bit further along. So figures show that the number of properties currently for sale that were listed to let in the past 3 years has risen dramatically. In 2024, 18% of all properties listed for sale had also been listed for rent within the 3 years prior to the sale of listing. So there you go. These are properties that they know that have been listed on the rental market, have now been put on the market for sale. So this was just over 28,000 properties, and was 100.6% higher than in June 2023. Also 34.6% higher than in June 2019. So those are not small numbers. And then 34. So it was also 27% higher than in May 2024, the month that Rishi Sunak called the general election. So again, no surprise. And this article is from the 18th of July. And in fact, there was a couple of others that of articles that I had seen as well, which was very interesting. So I'm assuming you can see my screen, hopefully. Yes, you can. Okay, great. So listen, 20 EA says that there's no doubt that our data shows a significant uplift in the number of landlords setting up, either reducing their portfolio size or possibly exiting the sector completely. For those of you who are online, I'm always interested as to what you're seeing or what your kind of sentiment is on the market. I'm always here to share my view. I share with you the data that we see, whether that be from Rightmove, Zoopla, on the market. But I'm always interested as what's your sentiment at the moment? What are you seeing in the market? What's your intentions towards the end of the year? Because it's something that's very important that's going to impact landlords potentially come the October budget. And this reminds me of the budget of 2016 with the Conservatives. So let me share with you something actually, which is very, very interesting, and perhaps interesting or scary for landlords. So if we remember back in 2016, what we did see was George Osborne announcing a number of tax changes, and the purpose of this, by the way, guys, when George Osborne came in 2016, was to make the market fairer for other people who enter into the property market that weren't landlords. So what I mean by this is, if we look at Section 24 and we look at why it was introduced, George Osborne said it wasn't fair that landlords could offset mortgage interest costs, whereby other homeowners couldn't. So this would be brought in to have a fairer system for those who did own properties. And of course, we saw that Section 24 being introduced and impacting a lot of landlords. And I'm going to give you an example of that. I'm very visual, so I love this visual from AXA, and this was back a few years ago, and it just shows us a few examples. So I like this example, which is Michael, the professional. This is a buy-to-let investor who relies on income of their rental, of his rental of £110,000 per year. So here you have Michael, who has several properties, has a rental, have them rented, has that rental income. And this is a comment by Michael, right? I was lucky enough to inherit a portfolio of properties recently, which means I don't need to have another job. I'm worried about how the changes are going to affect my sole source of income. And of course, let's remember, guys, this was back a few years ago. So if we look at Michael, and we've seen that back then, this would be what Michael will be looking at as that Section 24 was introduced into the market. So in 2017, there's £23,000, and as this was phased in, and that 25% dropped over the course of those 4 years, he was then looking at £29,000. That's crazy. That is crazy. So let me read this to get some context. Let's assume that Michael earns £110,000 per year for rental income and pays £27,000 interest annually. Here's how the amount of tax Michael pays could be affected. The money landlords can write off tax purposes drops by 25% each year between 2017 and 2020. So again, here you are, 2017, 23,000, and then it goes up here, £29,300. So how does Michael feel about this? Well, Michael's impacted because of the large number of properties Michael owns and the income he receives. The changes would, I say could, because this was prior to it being implemented, now we know would have pushed Michael taxable income considerably. The question I have is Michael even in the buy-to-let market, or has he just purely just exited himself? So again, very interesting topics there. I've done something here that I shouldn't. Bear with me one moment. Okay. Great. So I've done it again. So going back to the articles, there's one particular, and actually, let's look at the stamp duty for Michael and how that would have affected Michael in comparison to other homeowners. So hopefully you can see my screen. Just give me a thumbs up if you can. So if we look at a property of £500,000 and we look at the stamp duty, and I'm jumping onto the stamp duty, by the way, guys, because the stamp duty levy, so that surcharge of 3% that was introduced by George Osborne, also kicked in 2016. So keep up with me. So we've jumped from section 24 for one moment to look at the stamp duty, and all of this is relevant in terms of why landlords are exiting the market, and we're seeing those numbers jump and continue since 2016. So if we look at a first-time buyer buying a property of £500,000, what we can see is that would have resulted to £3,750. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. Listen, we have people that want to get onto the property market who aspire in owning their own home. And I agree there should be a difference between home buyers and buy-to-let investors. But look at the difference. The question is, should it be this huge gap, right? So £3,750, and then that it is at a average of around about 0.8%. And again, guys, this is a first time buyer. Now, if we were to look at this same this same price, and looked at it from the perspective of an additional property or second home, then we are looking at £27,500. That's £27,500. That is what a buy-to-let investor would have to pay to as stamp duty, land tax, to buy a property of the same value in comparison to a first-time buyer. So listen, with that all said, I do want to jump into this article, which talks about, if I can bring it up, a potential tax that is coming our way. So, not sure what happened. Challenges with this. Okay, so we have Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Tax hike rumors fuel anxiety in PRS, private rented sector. So if you've not been following these guys, here is the big news for you. So rumors of capital gains tax hike could take a toll on landlords and tenants. In a new interview on Bloomberg TV, Chancellor Rachel Reeves refused to rule out an increase in capital gain tax in October for the October budget. The uncertainty is already affecting the property market, with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, so this is RICS, of course, reporting a 16% drop in new landlords instructing estate agents in the 3 months leading to July, as landlords grow more concerned about Labour's tax plans. So, if you've been following our channel, what you also know is that the government has like a 20 billion fund gap, and they're looking at ways and how they're going to actually be able to fill this in, which is worrying. It's not only worrying for the buy to let industry, it's worrying for businesses. It's worrying, they have to fund somewhere, they have to fill in that gap. And it's not peanuts here. We are talking about 20 billion pounds. And one of the ways a lot of landlords believe this is going to be filled in is going to be based on that change in capital gain tax. Some speculating it's going to be aligned with income tax. And of course, there is going to be an extra cost to landlords. In fact, if we go with that theory, what we can see is this one here, which is potential capital gains tax changes could cost landlords £11,000. So the UK landlords could be £11,000 worse off on average if capital gain tax are adjusted to match income tax rates, research reveals. So this is a wealth management company who says that potential change, although not mentioned by Rachel Reeves, seems to be keeping her cards very close to her chest, could be part of a broader measures to address the 20 billion fund gap. Currently, homeowners benefit from private residence relief, exempting them from capital gain tax. So tight-lipped Rachel Reeves and the Labour Party. So Sean Moore, a tax and financial planning expert, during Labour's election campaign, the party was tight-lipped on its plans surrounding capital gains. Homeowners rushed to sell their second properties. So, is this having an impact on the property prices? I mean, if there is truth behind this and we have homeowners, landlords rushing to sell their properties, what we do know is if the property market is flooded with stock, then that naturally impacts the prices. More competition naturally means better prices for buyers. So, could this also be an opportunity for those landlords who are absolutely not shifting their ideas and thinking, this is a great opportunity? That is partly what I believe. I believe that this provides a great opportunity for a lot of buy-to-let investors out there who are thinking of growing their portfolio. So, anyone just jumping on, we are talking about how landlords are exiting the market at the back of course, the tax changes that we've seen since 2016 by no other George Osborne Conservative. It's not all about the Labour Party, but also with regards to this potential change coming up in October, and landlords and others are rushing to sell their properties before this potential tax comes in October budget by Labour, who are keeping their lips very tight and their cards very close to their chest with regards to any capital gain tax to be able to fill in that £20 billion gap that they have in funds. So that would be interesting to see. Let's see if we have any questions here by anyone before we jump in. Again, appreciate you all who do decide to jump in. So let's see here. We've got Andrew, wise process. So Daniel, it's really admittedly the PRS is heavily taxed, but as regards to the regulations, all industry have changing regulation. Rents are only going one way. Yeah, absolutely. Let me bring this up so people can read it. So it's really, really, admittedly, the PRS is heavily taxed, but as regards to the regulation, all industry having changing regulation, rents are only going one way. Yeah, and there's a report, and that's an interesting point, Daniel, because as I said, for those of you just jumped in, Property Mark have released a report which goes really in depth to the impact of Section 24, which of course is the tax relief on mortgage interest cost that you can, set off, offset your income. So, if we go to wide process, so Dan, you can a good point. Regulations always changing. Yeah, absolutely. Always great to see you guys having a conversation. It's all about finding the balance. It's tough, but it's necessary to keep the market fair for everyone involved. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it. To an extent, leveling up the system between home buyers and those buy to let investors to an extent and to a degree. I agree, but to what? When does it all end? When does it all end, Andrew? That is the question. So, I'm talking a lot about this Property Mark article that was published. Let's dive into this for a sec. But before we do, okay. So before we do, let's just jump straight. Apologies, guys. I seem to have lost one of my. Here you are. So the impact of Section 24 on buy-to-let landlords. So this is the article, the biggest article that I wanted to share with you here today. And for anyone sensitive out there, you probably want to jump off now because this goes deep into not only the impact of Section 24, but also how landlords have looked to mitigate that impact and ultimately a conclusion by Property Mark. I'm going to try to. There you go. So, private landlords play a critical role in the delivery of a functioning and stable PRS policy, which retain and attract new landlords must be considered. So, despite the significant Section 24, it is not clear how landlords have been impacted of their future intentions. The English PRS is in a state of flux, and this research is important to identify the address and address the challenges. So, this article is quite lengthy, but let's start from here. So, context Section 24. Over a decade, the English PRS has been subject to several legislative changes, many of which these have been impacted by the viability of PRS investments, including the introduction of the 3% stamp duty, which we already discussed. And we saw the difference between a home buyer buying their home costing I can't even remember. I think it was around about £3,000, and then looking at a buy-to-let investor and them having to pay something along the lines of almost £28,000. Big difference, big jump that 3% made, and that was really to deter more people, more buy-to-let investors, either getting additional property or even entering the market altogether. And all of this happened back in 2016. Remember, with George Osborne, because I know that a lot of people have been saying, Labour is not a landlord friendly, and I get it. Yet, Conservative have not necessarily been too friendly to landlords either, and it's been quite a few years as well. So, just to put things into perspective, its government, whether it's Labour or Conservative, have not been quite friendly. So, you're looking at the efficiency stand in the UK, also had an impact. So, if we look at this, we talked about the tax year, sort of that 25% drop in each year. So, here we have a graph, which is the inflation percentage change, 12% period, and we got. Let me just go to mortgage status this looks into as well. So this actually provides some basic insights into the participants' mortgage status. So although some landlords benefited from being on a fixed rate mortgage deals, over two-thirds, 69%, had recently experienced an increase in their monthly mortgage repayment. Around 10% reported average increase equating to less than £100 a month. One in five, 20%, reported between 101 and 250 a month, and almost a quarter, 23%, reported between 250 and £500. So let's look at this here, this graph. So this grey area here is no increase whatsoever. So, you know, not sure how they manage that. Landlords who own their property outright. And then this one here, this dark grey is £500 per month plus, so 16%. So I have two rental properties with my wife. The mortgage on both have gone from £300 per calendar month to £750. My God. So since January 2022, my mortgage interest payments have increased by 360% on both rental properties. And again, this goes back to the example of Michael, the professional who I just shared with you, which for those of you who've just joined, I gave an example of both a professional landlord and a first-time home buyer, and the huge difference between stamp duty. And I get it. I agree. There should be a difference, but should it be that high? Okay. So before I carry on this, I know that I'll have a few questions here which I probably want to look at. So it would be good if you can also include if there are any indications that government policies might shift to provide a relief for landlords. Well, they're certainly going to shift a wise process, but I don't believe they're going to shift in terms of providing relief to landlords. At least there's nothing that I've heard of. But I know that the government will be sensible in not pushing landlords too far, because I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do if landlords continue to exit the market, which we'll see those findings in the Property Mark report, which we'll jump back on in a minute, which leads into that and gives some stats towards that, how it's impacted both not only landlords but tenants as we continue. So I hope that's helpful, Wise Properties. So, Danny, what advice would you give to landlords who are on the fence about selling their properties? You know, I think it's very much a case by case basis, Leslie. It's a very personal decision. I would need to know a little bit more about perhaps your personal situation. What I would say is if you are not incorporated, if you don't have a limited company and you own a few properties, I don't see how you can make buy to let viable with that structure. So if you haven't done so already, I'm no tax expert here, Leslie, but if you haven't done so already, I believe that the best thing you can do is speak to a tax expert, which, by the way, we're going to have some guests come on our live. So if you're not subscribed already, I suggest that you do, Leslie, number one. So you can get some insight from the experts that are jumping in, which we're also going to be including a tax expert. Number two, you actually reach out to a tax expert. The best experts you can speak to, a consultant, is always going to be someone who can refer them. So family, friends, neighbors, anyone. If you don't have anyone, just shoot me a comment and I'll be more than happy to ping over a link to someone who you can speak to, Leslie. So so I hope that's helpful, Leslie. It really depends on your situation. For me, I think that if you're going to own 3, 4 or more properties, there is no reason why you can't make buy to let profitable. You just need the right structure and you need the right team to be able to leverage. Otherwise, you're going to be a slave to all these 170, 80 regulations plus. You're going to need the right team or have a lot of time and a lot of knowledge to be able to navigate through. I hope that's helpful. Okay. And then we have Andrew with another. It's all about finding the right balance, I believe, already. So we have Tim Rowley. Have put all 3 rentals up for sale. Tim, Tim, to get out of the rental market and get out of the UK. Is that get out of the UK with your money or get out of the UK yourself and your money, Tim? I'll be interested to find out. And whereabouts are you, Tim? Are you in London? Are you up north? I'm always interested and fascinated to find out stories of landlords across the country, with some, having sort of different experiences. Thank you for jumping on, Tim. Really appreciate. Would like to find out more if we may. Danny, please to share could be the reasons behind the decline in buy-to-let purchases. Yeah, I mean, Andrew, as we continue to go through this, we're going to see the conclusion of the Property Mark report, which dives into very deep into the consequences and the outcome of Section 24 and all the taxes that government have come in. And that will give us an indication of the landlords exiting the market. So let's look at the impact. So landlords' perceptions. Landlords overwhelmingly describe Section 24 as unfair. Many landlords equated the removal of interest rate relief with being taxed on turnover and not profit. This is not technically correct. Section 24 allows some relief at the basic rate. Additionally, there is a range of non-finance costs that landlords can offset against tax. However, as interest repayments generally make up a sizable proportion of landlords' outgoings, it is not difficult to understand why this view persists. Of course, and I speak with landlords on a daily basis, and that's pretty much the same sentiment. There's no other business that is taxed on its turnover and it's not and not on its profit, on net profit, and that is true. I mean, some landlords will go as far as to say that this is illegal. Section 24 is illegal and it should be taken to court and it should be abolished because it's illegal. What's your view? If you're a landlord on this, leave me a comment. If you're a tenant or a renter, I'd be interested to find out your view as well. And if you are a renter, let's not forget something. And we're going to dive deep into this. This could be one of the biggest reasons, together with mortgage rates going up, why rental has gone up so high. Because listen, guys, if the margin of landlords are impacted in any way, someone has to pay that cost. Unfortunately, that someone comes down to tenants. And we've seen this not only with the Section 24, with the tenant fee ban that happened back in 2019. Landlords won't absorb these costs. It's just something that doesn't happen. It's tenants who absorb this cost. That's just the fact. So we are now taxed on turnover, not profit, which doesn't seem right. Well, it's not right. And again, some landlords saying it's right out illegal. I now pay tax on gross rent. I pay tax money. Okay, so these are all sort of landlord sentiment. So the impact of Section 24, by the way, this is not only Section 24, this is the impact overall taxes, the changes in taxes. And I'm going to bring this up, just moving away from Section 24 and the impact it's had. Capital gain tax, and correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, capital gain tax over the recent years has changed. I believe there was an allowance of £12,300, correct me if I'm wrong, and then that went down to £6,000 and then ultimately £3,000. From £12,000 gone down to £3,000. That is another impact that taxes changes that the government has made that has a huge impact and should be covered here, I hope. So I'm massively affected by not being able to claim all the interest payment deduction. This questions whether this portfolio remains financially viable. A number of of my properties are borderline whether they make profit now or a loss. One boiler or roof repair and they will be easily making a loss. And I get it. And again, guys, anyone who has a property that is not incorporated, that is not Section 20, that's not incorporated, that's impacted by Section 24, I will find it very hard to believe if you can make a profit with that structure. And it's just the world we live in. And it's just how the government has pushed us into incorporation. Okay, incorporating. So, concerningly, others were in a loss-making position. By the time of the mortgage and the taxes paid, I am in a deficit monthly. And of course, you can absorb this for a period of time, but it gets to a point where, what's the point? What's the point of keeping a property that is or business that's simply not profitable? Financial and non-financial impacts. Given the break even, the loss-making positions being sustained, it is not surprising that some landlords reported being financially squeezed. And this is what this video is about here today, guys. It's about landlords being squeezed and exiting the market. But most importantly, also what's going to happen in October with the budget of Labour, who's been tight-lipped around capital gain tax. Is this, the question here is this the straw that breaks the camel's back for landlords? They've absorbed all of these tax changes and all of these regulations, and now are they looking at capital gain tax hike when they were already considering, and should they just go into the sales market right now and sell their property? So going back here, so steps taken to mitigate against the impact of Section 24. So a range of strategies could be adopted so landlords can mitigate against the impact of Section 24. These include transferring ownership from private rented sector property to a spouse or partner in a lower tax banding. So there you are. This is the tip of the evening. Again, I'm no tax expert, but here's a tip for you. And transferring property into a limited company incorporation, paying down mortgages, selling one or more properties, reducing the cost, or increasing rents, amongst others. So let's break this down and dissect this. So we've got transferring ownership of a private rented sector property to a spouse or partner in a lower tax bracket banding. So that will save you absolutely from paying more tax. So that's one. Number two, transferring the property into a limited company. That also has its impact, by the way. And again, speak to a tax expert with that. Paying down mortgages. So, of course, if you pay down the mortgages, then that's certainly going to help, because then you're not going to be able to, if you're paying £27,000 in mortgages, it's definitely going to save you. So selling one or more properties, but then you may want to increase your portfolio, and then reducing your cost or increasing rents. What I've seen a lot is a combination of all of these, but especially as we've seen, especially in London, 30% increase in rent since 2020. Those are crazy numbers. And this has been a huge factor as to why that is. So incorporation, several landlords reported that they had transferred ownership of properties to a limited company. For example, my property was all held in personal names, so my tax bill was considerably higher, to the point where it was almost pointless investment. And that's the same story for a lot of people. But here you are, as we said, rent increases. Look at this. Rent increases from 2017 was just down here, went up again here. But from down here, from 2018, look where it is now. So let's look at the conclusion of Property Mark, because I think it's going to be important to review this. So if we look at the conclusion, introduction of Section 24 was predicated on a need of fairness and in the tax system, and a need to reduce the risk of financial instability posed by the buy-to-let industry. So what George Osborne argued was that the property market was booming, and especially when we looked at the buy-to-let market was even booming even more. And so they wanted to call it off to an extent. They wanted to call off the market, and this was one of the ways where, number one, they can call off the market, but number two, they can make the tax system fairer between homeowners and buy-to-let investors. Sorry, guys, I'm just looking at something here. It's in 2024. So looking back at this conclusion, George Osborne was arguing that it was to make it fair overall. But overall, this is this paper finds that the introduction of Section 24 had a wide-ranging consequences for the sector. Its landlords and its tenants, most of which were considered in HMRC Policy Impact Summit 2017. Now, the measures pushed some landlords into higher tax bandings and has reduced the financial viability. Okay, we've discussed that the financial predicament of landlords face cannot be solely attributed to the introduction of Section 24. The rapid rise of mortgage rates, interest have also had an impact of cost of living crisis. However, Section 24 is substantive impact many buy-to-let. Landlords have adopted a range of strategies responding to challenges to Section 24, which we already looked at. Now, maintenance budgets have also been reduced, often intentionally because of reduced cash flows. So, the recommendations. We recognize a critical role that private landlords play in the delivery of functioning and stable PRS and recommended that policymakers consider policies which attract new and retain existing landlord sector. Why? Because the government hasn't stepped in to actually provide private rented accommodation. And therefore, landlords have. They've provided this to an extent. So I want to share with you one other, but before I do, let me have a look at any questions that you may have. So we have Rob. You got a few questions from Rob. So hopefully you guys can see this. So Rob, just like in every market, there's always going to be a proportion of population susceptible to believe in irrational media fear and fear mongering. Absolutely. I agree with you, Rob. I'm there with you. A lot of fear mongering out there and a lot of noise in the media. But the fact is that there are landlords leaving the market. And let's put this into context, Rob, whilst we're on this topic. Which landlords are actually leaving the market? Who are they? Are they all being scared off? Well, typically what I've been seeing is those accidental landlords, again, who have the wrong structure and just not making it viable for them. But I'm also seeing those old school landlords who purchased properties back in the 1990s. They're now at an age where they think, you know what, this isn't as simple as it was before. Perhaps don't want to leave that burden to their children and decided to, you know what, I'm going to cash out. This is the right time for me to sell up and I'm all good. Unfortunately, a lot of landlords who have perhaps purchased properties within the last 10 years don't have the luxury to do that because the capital growth is simply not there. So, looking at this, we have Stephen. I met two people moving out of the UK next few months. Both are skilled. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, we do have a lack of skilled workers increasingly. I'm not sure where you're leading with this, but if you can elaborate on that, I'd be very grateful. So here's another one with Tim. Have put all rental. Okay, we've read that one. And then we got Rob again. The only landlords that are being squeezed are those landlords with properties with mortgage over £200,000. I buy freehold buy-to-let properties for 80,000 and make 300 net on each. Well, good on you, Rob. You're certainly not in London then, are you? So typically the landlords here in the UK, if they do have mortgages, it's definitely going to be more than 200k. And for you to buy a freehold buy-to-let property for 80k, it would be interesting to find out what areas you're working in, or perhaps you don't even want to include this here because you have landlords flooding into the area where you're continuing to grow. But yeah, thank you, Rob. Appreciate the info. So I wanted to share with you the numbers as they continue to come in when it comes to the landlords sort of exiting the market, the buy-to-let market at least. So let's look at this back to... Thank you for sharing. Belfast. Well, now that you are on the topic of Belfast, Rob, it's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, Belfast is one of the few properties that have not been able to recover, I believe, since the financial crisis or something like that, where all the rest of, all the rest have, including parts of Europe. And so is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. Maybe it's a good thing for long-term kind of investment. If it hasn't increased in any way, then it may be a good opportunity to buy. I mean, the same could be said for London. London has said that hasn't really done anything. It's been flat for the course of around about 10 years. And by the way, there is a video that has been very popular on whether London is a great place to actually invest in property. You want to be looking at that if you are in London or thinking of buying in London, or perhaps even thinking of exiting the market in London. It's a great video, and it talks about London vs the North, something along them lines. If you haven't checked it out, subscribe to the channel, and you will have those videos coming up. So prices are up 7%. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. So, any other questions, guys, just feel free to put it through as I jump into the next article. But for those of you who've just jumping in, what I've shared today is really looking at the stats of people, of landlords exiting the market and looking at those numbers. And that is the reason for that is a combination of tax, regulation, mortgage rates, and so forth. And we did look at this in June 2024. June 24, 18% of all properties listed for sale has also been listed for rent. So what we're looking at is that there is a huge amount of properties that are up for sale, have been on the rental market. And this just proves that more landlords are exiting the market. There is another article which I wanted to share with you, which is this one. This one fits in perfectly to drive the same point. This one. So the topic here is, just in case you missed it, those of you who have just joined, we have Rachel Reeves, who has been tight-lipped about tax changes for capital gain tax changes for the October budget, and whether this is contributing to more landlords actually putting their property to the market quickly before it's too late. And that drives us into this article. Capital gains tax, landlord sell-off could derail housing market. A prominent analyst is warning landlords fearful, this goes in, Rob, to your fear-mongering, fearful of a rise in capital gain tax could sell up in droves this autumn, and that the in turn could derail possible wider housing market recovery. Well, I guess this is probably music to the ears to a lot of buyers out there who are not deterred by that, whether that be buy-to-let investors or first-time buyers. I guess from a perspective of first-time buyers, they're like, amazing, great, bring it on. The more fear, the more scaremongering, the more, and whether this is even true or not, bring it on, because this helps us get onto the property market. Is going to be able to balance out the prices. Is there any truth to that? I don't know, but that could derail possible. Okay, so there's been widespread speculation about possible capital gain tax rise in October budget, fueled by comments by the Chancellor Reeves. So, how Sarah Cole's personal finance analysis at this business consultancy Hargreaves says, last week, Bank of England base rates cut. It's likely to herald modest house price growth over the past of 2024. But she warns that it's not going to be a patch on the boom of recent years, and that many capital gain tax change may put a lid on increases. So what they're saying here, guys, is that any possible increases on sales price from the good news of mortgage rates that are coming down at the back of the cut of the rates of the Bank of England, which people were expecting, could be now dampened by this rumor of capital gain tax, because it's flooding with more stock on the market. That is my understanding from this article. So there will be property investors who decide that it's not worth the risk and will sell up before any potential change comes in. Is that you? If you're on this, share your views on the comment. If there's too many of them, it could create a glut of property for sale and keep prices down. So buy-to-let purchases have already slumped 14% from £224,000 to 193,000 in the year of June 2024. So that's looking at short term. I'm not even looking back in 2017, where the immediate reaction, the immediate kind of setup that we saw during that period of time. So that's 14%. Now, what else do we have here? This figure comes from the Chartered Accountant and Business Advice Company. So this has meant that purchases of buy-to-let properties has fallen to the lowest level since the government introduced a higher rate of stamp duty additional dwellings in 2016. So we're seeing, what this is saying is, despite all that I shared with you with regards to the changes that Judge Osborne implemented and announced in that 2015 budget and implemented in 2016, with tax changes, stamp duty, the Section 24, we're seeing more landlords right now exit the market than we did with the reaction of immediately at the back of that announcement. So, is this to be expected with the potential Labour government coming in place? Was that kind of, that was a no-brainer as soon as landlords would have had a hint of Labour coming in? But as I said before, the Conservative haven't necessarily been landlord friendly, and Labour is just sprinkling in a little bit more left policies to what they already had to work with. And that foundation they had to work with when it comes to regulation, by the way, guys, is of course the old renters reform bill that is now dead. And what Labour just simply did was come in, take that foundation, okay, this renters right bill, relabel it, rebrand it into the renters right bill, and sprinkling in a little bit of left policies in there. And another impact that we're going to have, of course, with rent increases is going to be that they're not going to control rent. That's what they've promised. But what they have said is they're going to control sort of those rental bidding wars, which it will be interesting to see how exactly they plan to implement that. So what do we have here? Looking at this article, so this has meant that purchase buy-to-let property have fallen to the lowest level, as I said, and as its peaks, £287,000 purchases were made in the year in June 2021. This fall in buy-to-let purchases has partly been driven by the sharp rise in interest rates on buy-to-let mortgages, but by series of measures introduced over the last few years. Those changes include preventing landlords from deducting mortgage interest rate, which we already looked at. Let's see what Andy Norton, partner of Lubbock Fine, says. We've seen a marked decrease in purchase activity for rental properties. Concerns that the new government will increase capital gain tax at the next budget. So, however, continued fall mortgage rate could change all of this. We've definitely seen changes in mortgage rates. So we feel that positive kind of sentiment that's come from the cut in the rate, England's Bank of England rate has definitely been sort of dripping through. And we had a mortgage expert on one of our webinars, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with and you missed this one, we have one every 3 months. I will leave a link on the description so you can definitely jump on to the next webinar that we have with all the experts that jump in. But what we did see was mortgage rates for buy-to-let investors going for around about 3.5%. Yes, they were with the lenders' fees that were now sort of become the norm these days, very expensive lenders' fees, but that was certainly something that we weren't seeing towards the end of last year. So let's see if there's any other questions before we jump into the final part of this call. So let's look at here. The only landlords that are being squeezed, okay, we've already seen that. Okay, that's surprising. We don't have more questions from the viewers. So listen, guys, if you don't know who we are from a channel point of view, so we do these live videos every Wednesday. We are bringing in experts We are bringing in experts in the next couple of weeks, and every week we'll have an expert for you to be able to ask them any questions, because we get these type of questions on a daily basis. So we have the final article here to see if no one has any questions. I'm going to give probably another few seconds to ask any questions, if any. Now, otherwise, we're going to jump on to another one. We'll give another few seconds as we bring up the last one here. Okay. No other questions. We're just going to jump on to the next one. Okay, cool. So, property Chancellor Chase Rachel Reed, already seen that one. I think that pretty much, we got this renters' rights bill. So if anyone did have this as an old one, I think that pretty much sums up all of our call today. I'm going to answer this last question from Wise Process. Would it be great if you can say how the Section 24 specifically impacted the profitability of rental properties? Yeah, I mean, if you missed that part, Wise Property, it is my recommendation is that you look back at the video and certainly have a look at the last the example with Michael. For those who have missed that part, I'm just going to bring that up very quickly because I think it was a very good and visual example by AXA. So back in 2016, Michael, as a professional, you had £110,000 bringing in income, rental income. Now, Michael paid £27,000 in mortgage rates, interest annually, against £110,000 with regards to their rental income. And this was the way how it impacted Michael as a professional landlord, from 2017 paying £23,000 up to £29,000. That's a huge impact, and that would have impacted Michael throughout those years. And then obviously that was phased in. There was other examples here, Wise Process, if that was helpful. So looking at someone like Martin, the part-timer who wasn't a full-time landlord, and how it impacted him. So perhaps not so much as Michael, but definitely whether you're a professional landlord or a part-timer, it's going to impact that bottom line. I hope that makes sense. So as I can see, there's no other questions. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys jumping on as always. And again, this video today was made for the purpose of seeing how landlords were exiting the market and continue to exit. If you missed those numbers, it was to say that they're exiting more now. So there is evidence to say that they're exiting more now than what they were exiting when the big changes were announced back in 2015 as part of the budget, the spring budget from the Conservatives with George Osborne. We have those numbers of how people were exiting the market during sort of, that 2017 and 19. But based on this report, saying that buy-to-let purchases have already slumped by 14%. And this is for the year of 2022 to 2023, and in comparison to the year ending of June 2024. And this statement, it says that purchase buy-to-let have fallen to the lowest level since the government introduced the higher rate stamp duty additional dwellings in 2016. So this is not me making up the numbers, guys. This is just data that I bring to you on a daily basis. At its peak, 287,000 property purchases were made in the year in June 2021. So this fall in buy-to-let purchases has partly been driven by the sharp rise in interest rates on buy-to-let mortgages, but also by a series of measures introduced over the last few years. And I guess to an extent, it makes sense, guys, because even though these tax changes were introduced back in 2016, they were phased in between 2017 and 2020, and perhaps landlords were making it work despite the huge increase, not being able to actually offset the mortgage interest costs even not being able to do that, they were making they were biting the bullet, as it were. But once interest rate shot sky high, it was just far too much. So there you have it, guys. Thank you so much for joining, as always. Really appreciate you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. And as we look at and continue to monitor whether the capital gain tax hike by Rachel Reeves and the Labour Party is actually truly a rumor, or it's going to happen. And if so, I know a lot of landlords are deciding to put their property on the market straight away to be able to avoid. A lot of them using the words, I can't risk it, because I was thinking of selling anyway. I was on the fence. And now with Labour in power, and besides that, thinking about putting into this capital gain tax hike, I'm off. I'm done. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. And have a good evening. Stay safe.